Hello and welcome to The Big Picture with me, Ishan. Today we celebrate the adoption of the Indian Constitution and also celebrate 125 years of the life and ideas of the driving force behind the Constitution, Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar. Now, while the impact Dr. Ambedkar had in defining today's India is unparalleled, tonight we decided to focus on one particular issue and one community that Baba Saheb is an icon for, the Dalit community. And today we ask, have the efforts that Dr. Ambedkar made towards the upliftment of this large section of society, have they borne fruit? And have Dalit issues been settled to some extent? I'll pose these questions to Professor Narendra Jadhav, Council for Social Development, Professor Sukhadeo Thorat, Chairman of the Indian Council of Social Science Research is with us, and Professor Salil Misra, historian at the Ambedkar University, Delhi, is also here with us in the studio. So I'll start with you, Professor Jadhav. As far as Dr. Ambedkar is concerned, let's try to understand the man and his vision that he had, because right now in 2015, while we might have studied his contribution in our history textbook, the idea that Dr. Ambedkar had about inclusiveness, about getting a particular community, especially the Dalit community, that was completely on the margins to the mainstream, what was his idea?
Well, when Dr. Ambedkar spoke about inclusive growth, he was probably the first economist to talk about inclusive growth. He was not focused on Dalits alone. What he meant was economic growth and development where all different strata of society would be participating in the nation building in terms of economic growth and development. That was basically his vision. And throughout his life, we do a lot of injustice to Dr. Ambedkar by just branding him as a leader of Dalits. Of course he was a leader of Dalits. Of course he was the messiah for Dalits. But he was not confined to that. No, he was truly a national leader. Now that is something, because everything that he did was keeping in front of him the broad national interest. And that is something which we have to understand.
All right, but today we've decided to focus in this particular half an hour on the Dalit community and the fact that, I mean, apart from the iconic nature that he has had and the impact that he's had on that community, Professor Thorat, as far as you're concerned, Dr. Ambedkar's contribution certainly is unparalleled from the Constitution to many ideas as far as inclusiveness also is concerned. But as far as the relevance of his ideas in today's India is concerned, your take on that?
No, Dr. Ambedkar is a lot more relevant today as he was in the early beginning or in the early 50s. I think he was the person who thought of a national development in its entirety and how we should have a development model which will also be inclusive of the Dalits and other marginalized section. If I remember correctly, as early as 1920, he developed a theories of economic development in which he emphasized on agriculture, industrialization, modernization. Then in 1946, when he was the minister in Executive Council, he focused on irrigation, water, power. So he has a particular model of economic development which he had proposed. But at the same time, he was concerned that the labor, Dalit, Adivasi should be a part of the growth processes. Right. So growth with equality, the growth that benefit everybody from the development experience was his major concern, and therefore he suggested policies. He suggested policies of overall economic growth. He suggested policies of which focus on labor. He suggested policies which focus on Dalit and general policy as well as the affirmative action policy, that because of the immense discrimination in social and economic sphere, you require protection to the scheduled caste against the discrimination. So he was the one who was the architect of the affirmative action policy in which he proposed. So even today, we are struggle with the meeting the demand of the communities which comes one after another asking for a reservation, which means the issue of providing an equal space to different group is still there, and Dr. Ambedkar's views are very, very important at this time. He was the one who argued that the Indian society is not based on inequality alone, but is based on graded inequality. And there are different groups which have a hierarchy of rights and privileges. And we have to develop a specific model of growth and empowerment in a manner such that we take the concern of each of the communities. That is why the problem exists. And I think, therefore, Ambedkar's views are a lot more relevant even today. they have to be taken a lot more seriously if we want to deal with the problem of graded inequality in this country. We can see that there has been, the reservation was given for scheduled caste and scheduled tribe, and now you see OBC coming to the picture.
Right.
There is a demand of Dalit Christian, Dalit Muslim, and Muslim as such. Then the other backward caste like Jat and the Patel. Why this group keep on coming and asking for a space? Simply because many of them feel that they are not being able to participate in the growth process as much as they should. So we have to develop a model which Ambedkar proposed, that is to deal with the graded inequality in this country. And he is a lot more relevant. But he is not taught in the universities, he is not taught in many other research institutes. His thoughts on caste, his thoughts on economic development, his thoughts on infrastructure development, all that need to be brought into the mainstream.
Absolutely, indeed, and as a part of the 125th birth anniversary celebrations of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, we of course would be doing a series of discussions over here on Rajya Sabha TV. I'd also like to introduce another panelist who's just come in. Saroj, Nagi, senior journalist, joins us in the studio. Thank you very much for coming in. But Professor Salil Misra, often it is also important to understand what goes into making such a man. The ideas we can really count, and not even count, the numerous such ideas and ideas. But as far as Dr. Ambedkar's personal life is concerned, the journey that he had was quite defining to the idea of India that he tried to create.
Oh, absolutely. I entirely agree with the previous two speakers. Well, his early experiences, his exposures to new societies, visits to America, his intellectual development, his sensitivities, his exposure to Indian society, Indian social structure, his understanding of Indian social structure, all of that went into the making of the person who was a modernist completely. And he had a vision of economic development in which he saw Indian traditions, village structure, inequalities as obstacles, caste system as obstacles. And he felt that these obstacles needed to be removed in order to prepare Indian society for a smooth transformation into a modern industrial society. So he did have a blueprint of a modern industrial society, and he saw certain obstacles. Lack of mobility is one. You see, his understanding of caste society, caste structure is that it's a house, Indian society is a house with many layers, many floors, and there is no mobility between. You enter into one floor and get out of the other floor. So there is no mobility. Now, lack of mobility is a great obstacle to modern economic development.
And social mobility, especially of the Dalit community, because I would like to focus, as we remember Dr. Ambedkar, given the fact that he really championed the cause, he was one of the people who put himself out there and said that this needs to be done right now.
So Dalit empowerment was an important thing in itself, but it was also important because they should be able to participate in the social and economic development as equal partners, for which mobility is important, for which demolition of the caste system, which is why he did not. I mean, he talked about annihilation of caste system. That is one aspect which is generally not noticed. He did want, in the short run, to for certain constitutional arrangements to be based on caste, but in the long run, he was very, very convinced that it is the annihilation of the caste system, as a structure has to go if India has to make a smooth transformation.
Interesting point you make over there, especially when we talk about reservations. Saroj, Nagi, coming to you, as far as, because the subject over here that we're discussing is how relevant is Dr. Ambedkar and the issues that he raised about the status of Dalits in society and them being brought into the mainstream. As far as those issues are concerned, how's India tackled them? How are we faring?
Yes, I think it's a very, very important issue, because if you remember what Dr. Ambedkar said while during the Constituent Assembly deliberations, among the things that he said is that political equality should lead to social equality also, and economic equality. So if you have political equality, which is what the Constitution, of which he was the chair of the drafting committee, if the Constitution promises you political equality, the ground reality should ensure that there is social and economic equality amongst people. Otherwise, political equality becomes meaningless up to a certain point. So I think when he said all this, it underscores the point that social equality is very, very relevant, not just in the India of which he was part of, but also today's India. Because today, if you see, you've got caste rights, you've got community rights, you've got communal rights, everything that he was against. But insofar as his own personality was concerned, I think this was a message that needs to be highlighted again and again, that he grew up amongst what we call the untouchables.
Right.
He was against the concept of untouchability. He did not agree with Gandhi and other leaders that these untouchables should be branded as Harijans, because then you're denying what actually is there in society. Your aim should be uplift people and not change nomenclatures. That is a very, very important, significant thing that he had said. And the fact that he emerged from what we call the underbelly of society to emerge as a champion of rights among the people and to preside over a constituent and to chair a constituent assembly drafting committee, I think that shows the power of the individual, because any other person in his position would probably have collapsed, given up, surrendered. He showed the spirit of the man, even of a man who comes from the bottom level of society. And the secondary, the ancillary point that flows from it is that he was able to do all this because he was able to educate himself.
Right.
So education is a very, very important tool where Dalits are concerned, where the OBCs are concerned, where the underprivileged are concerned, because once you're equipped with certain weapons, and in this case the educational weapon, then you're able to withstand every adversity and rise, provided you're provided, again I'm adding a proviso, provided you are given a level playing field up to a certain point.
Level playing field is an important point that keeps coming up all the time. Professor Jadhav, you've been wanting to come in.
Right. Basically, Dr. Ambedkar was an intellectual colossus, and Dr. Ambedkar's vision was to convert the political democracy that was created at the time of independence into a social and economic democracy.
Right.
That was his basic vision. And true to the issue that we are talking about, we are talking about, are Dalit issues settled to some extent? I think to answer that, we have to at least take a review of 5 different aspects, some of which have been talked about. First is education, second is health, third is livelihood and employment, fourth is overall economic upliftment, and the fifth one is living with dignity. In each one of them, while there is issues have been settled to some extent, what has not been happening or what has not happened remains very large. Let me take a quick review. Take the case of education. You know, on education and health, if you look at all the indicators of education and health between scheduled caste and scheduled tribes on one hand and all the rest of the population on the other, the gap between the two has narrowed to some extent, but in 2004 a vision was given that in 10 years this gap will be eliminated. We are far away from completely eliminating that gap. That is about education and health. Now on education there is something positive happening. Basically, because of Dr. Ambedkar's teaching, there is a young generation coming forward where there is a silent revolution taking place. Today, in every walk of life, from painting and drawing to neurosurgery, you will find a young Dalit boy or girl coming up and trying to make a place for himself or herself. Now, so that is happening in education and health. Livelihood opportunity, that's where the reservation comes into the picture. Reservation has benefited a large number of people. However, one cannot say that reservation has been faithfully implemented. Those benefits have not reached. More serious is, you know, following his spirit, the government of the day had organized something called Scheduled Caste Sub-Plan. The idea was to earmark certain amount of planned expenditure exclusively for scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, in at least in proportion to their share in the population. Regrettably, now this started in 1979. Regrettably, we are sitting in 2015. These provisions have never been adequately implemented. Final point, so, and there is a lot that needs to be done. Merely the earmarking of the funds is not in proportion to the population. Two, whatever is earmarked is diverted merely to other areas or other beneficiaries. Third, large amount of that is allowed to lapse. We have done very badly in terms of full implementation. One final point and I stop, and this is about living with dignity. Now that's where untouchability and atrocities come into the picture. Now on this aspect, I'll just take 1 minute more. On this aspect, untouchability is something which has apparently gone, but it still persists in various forms, and we have seen that. And atrocities, I regret to say that in spite of the legal protection available, in terms of the Prevention of Atrocities Act, you will see that the number of atrocities have increased, and the proportion of cases coming to fruition in the court of law is negligibly small. And therefore, in terms of living life with dignity, I think here again we have a lot more ground to cover than what we claim to have.
To provide a sense of social justice is perhaps what really is missing right now. Given the spate of incidents, I mean, Saroj, Nagi, we saw that horrific incident in Faridabad with those 2 Dalit children being burnt alive at night. So in that sense, there is a fight for resources that is often cited as the root cause of the problem between, say, upper caste and lower caste, or in rural India, where it often is striking. Many in Delhi would say, I don't believe in the caste system, but if you travel to the hinterland, it certainly exists, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's a social reality, and you cannot shut your eyes to it. Just and the fact that, we have laws, but the test of a law is how much is it implemented and where does it lead to, and that is where the gap lies. You can make the best of laws, but if you don't implement them, they are as good as not being there. And that is what is happening down in the villages. Because the other aspect of this entire problem is that there is hardly any infrastructure facility there. There's no connectivity. Something which happens in the villages today would reach the newspapers probably a week later or even 10 days later, or for the Babu to go there, it might take 3 days or 4 days. So by that time, things have happened, the repercussions have taken place, the alienation has set in, the social divide that is taking place is there among the people.
And is it increasing?
That deepens.
The social divide between people.
I can't really say whether it's increasing, but the fact is that there are more cases coming into the open, and hence they are more visible now. It's not that they were not taking place earlier, but we were not really aware of it. So the more these stories come out, the better it is for India, because then you can take corrective, reparative measures, and also, I think most important is to change the mindsets of people, not amongst the Dalits or scheduled castes or scheduled tribes themselves, but also among the people who plan for them, or who interact with them, or who don't interact with them.
And those who are implementing
those who are implementing, the planners or the implementers, the bureaucrats. I think there needs to be a sensitivity involved in it. And earlier there was some proposal in some form or the other that a certain amount of years should be spent in villages. I think that's a very good proposal. In the sense, you can't make it mandatory, but you have to create that kind of sentiment among the people themselves that we have to do something for the underclass.
You have to see those divisions for yourself.
Yes, and you have to change society.
All right, Professor Thorat, I want to come across to you, because let's also understand that post Dr. Ambedkar, as far as the Dalit community is concerned, Dr. Ambedkar's legacy never really became a political movement of sorts. While it would be sort of, given the number of people, it could have really become big, and we could have addressed this problem in leaps and bounds, but that really hasn't happened. Why?
Well, I think this is an important question that there has not been enough political movement and a strong political movement. But I think if you look at regionally, in several states, in several places, there has been a mobilization among Dalit. UP is one of the very outstanding example where the Dalit have really mobilized and acquired the power and made an impact. But similarly, in each and every state, we find a local mobilization of the Dalit. But I think the issue is that they are poor. There are issues of there are cost of mobilizations. So therefore, we do not see at all India level a very unified political entity as far as the Dalit are concerned. But there are other issues which I would like to share with you very quickly. Is that the issue of political reservation itself has its own limitation. Dr. Ambedkar has insisted that they should have a separate electorate. Separate electorate provide them to elect the people of their choice, persons of their choice, and those people are then independent. and they can talk about the Dalit problem. They don't depend on in the election on the high caste. Now we did not accept separate electorate. We went for a reservation, and under reservation, all the 82 members of the parliament who come to the reservation have to depend on high caste for the election.
Right.
And therefore they are not as independent as they should be, because they are always under threat that next time they won't be elected. It is not that they are not interested in the cause.
Okay.
So I think the question of sending the proper representative is still there. That's a question of electoral methods which we will have to address. But there is another issue that I would like to mention, that this is a political issue, but as far as the economic issue is concerned, there are 2-3 points I would like to quickly mention.
Very quickly, because we almost out of time.
There has been a progress. There is no doubt about it. Poverty has declined, enrollment in higher education has increased, school education is quite high. But the rate at which it has improved is lower than that of other. As a result of that, there is a gap, that the gap persists between them. Their poverty is almost double than the poverty of high caste, or it is 30% more than the poverty of all India average. The malnutrition rate is very high. The enrollment rate is 11% in higher education as against 27% for higher caste, or 17% at all India level. Now, as far as the atrocities and discrimination is concerned, it has declined in many fields, but it still persists in a very, very serious way in many other fields. If we take the number of cases registered in the Civil Rights Act and the Atrocity Act, from 1995 to 2013, more than 6 lakh cases were registered by the Dalit, which comes to about more than 30,000 per year. Now, this is the tip of the iceberg. The primary study really brings out the real form of discrimination. They face discrimination in the civic and social and religious life, but the major part of the discrimination also comes in economics, in market, in getting employment, in indulging into business.
And the left party also started talking about private sector reservation for Dalit as well. So I think this issue would be coming up again. We're almost out of time, Professor Thorat. I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but we're almost out of time. And Professor,
I would like to.
Very quickly.
You carry on.
Okay. So Professor Misra, I'll come to you. The final question is, how do we take? Professor Thorat, we'll just come back to you. The final question is, how do we take Dr. Ambedkar's legacy forward in 2015? We're celebrating 125 years of his birth, but in terms of the essence of Dr. Ambedkar, how do we take that forward?
I think at 2 levels. First is we need to very positively but critically engage with his legacy. What does it mean? It has political dimensions, social dimensions, literary dimensions. He also left, there's a very vibrant literary movement. We need to critically engage with it, and not simply engage with it. We need to also develop the legacy. We need to develop it in accordance with the requirements of the times. And for that, we need to have a very critical look at Ambedkar. What are the kind of problems that he was confronting, his dilemmas, problems he could not resolve. We need to confront them. So I think sometimes we need to brutally handle legacies so that we are able to critically engage with it and also develop it. The most important point that I would like to make is that it's a legacy which we need to constantly develop, not simply to remember.
All right, Professor Jadhav, final word, 30 seconds.
30 seconds. To take his legacy forward, 3 things are required. First of all, we have to understand the legacy of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. Awareness about the legacy, creation of awareness of the legacy is very important. That's the first thing. Second thing that we need to do is to faithfully implement the scheduled caste sub-plan. That will have enormous implication for the economic development of scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, and that would be a contribution to the inclusive growth. And the final one is that we have to seriously contemplate implementing private sector reservation in this country.
All right, these are the points, and that is a debate that we'll be doing again. Professor Thorat, because I interrupted you, one final word to you. You had to make that final point. Please go ahead, and then we'll wrap up the show.
Yeah, the final point is that I agree with Narendra Jadhav that the reservation in government services account a very small proportion of the total employment. Therefore, private sector has to be brought in. 90% of your employment is in the private sector. But the second and last important point that I would like to make is that the Dalits still lack asset, they lack land, they lack private enterprises. They account only 10% of the total private enterprises in the country. and therefore they don't have the asset, and that is because we don't have a proper affirmative action policy.
Okay.
I would suggest that we require a reparation, we require a compensation, that the Dalits should be given at a one-time compensation for the denial of right to land, denial of right to enterprises, denial of right to employment in certain sector. We will have to have a mega move on providing them asset in the form of land and enterprises, the way Malaysia has done, the way South Africa has done.
All right, so just 10 seconds, if you will want to come in.
What can you do?
As far as
you have
this
to provide them the
issue, it's
asset.
becoming quite political now with the reservation in the private sector coming in.
And then there is a
final word to you.
Yes, I think you have to address three things. One is educate them. Two, provide them with a certain wherewithal to start their own businesses or employment, as other co-panelists have mentioned. And third, that if there is a cottage industry or vocational training for them, to buy up whatever they produce. We've had examples in Madhya Pradesh, for example, had taken the step about 10 years back to buy up things which Dalits had produced. I think that is very, very important. It develops a sense of independence, gives you economic, it instills a sense of pride in what you're doing. Instead of showing charity to them, you have, yes. It shouldn't be just charity. You should also equip them with certain skills and also buy up those skills from them.
All right, I'd like to thank all of you for coming in today. There is indeed such a large legacy that we cannot fit it into half an hour, and we would certainly be discussing them as we celebrate 125 years of the birth anniversary of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. But it's still a long way to go as far as the Dalit community is concerned, and we'll be continuing to discuss this issue right here on Rajya Sabha TV. Thanks so much for watching.